she had surgery this morning. She's had a aneurysm behind her eye that was leaking. They went in to do surgery and it ruptured. And now they've sedated her and put her on the ventilator, but they said her vitals are good, but they've done that. Her name's Paula Huggins. She's my age. If you will, please add pictures of this. I have those pictures. Paula Huggins.
All right, anybody else? I did go by and see Miss Phyllis Floyd today. Got to check on her and she's having a rough go with treatments. Just, that's a normal thing unfortunately, but, just like I said, had a good time talking with her, and a lot of the ladies from her Sunday school class have been visiting, and it's a really good thing watching our church take care of her. You good back there?
I was asking her who that was. Sorry.
She normally sits right there. And a lot of times she's here, her brother's with her. Her brother goes to Lawrence First Baptist, Tony Fowler. She hasn't been in several weeks, ever since she got the diagnosis, she hasn't been. But she just started treatment 2 weeks ago. And so she had her second treatment Monday. And so, I'm gonna do them with Awesome Buck this weekend, just to kind of give it to them and let them eat and all that. Chris checked on her a while back, because we wanted to give her, we have something for her, and she said, I'll make it to church one of these Sundays, and so literally, which just, as soon as she says, hey, I'm coming, we'll have something planned for her. Miss Betty, thank you, he loved it. And I have your crock pot here, washed and ready to come back home, so. Don't leave without getting your crock pot back. Yes, what do you want for your birthday? Broccoli and cheese soup. I know exactly what you're talking about.
That's the baby, is today her birthday?
Yeah.
Did you lose that tooth yet?
Do what? No, it's still hanging on. I can show you all videos of last night trying to get it out of his mouth, but he did not want to have it. So, but, yeah, and then May 17th is Sarah's birthday, and that's the day that we're back doing all the classes and all that kind of stuff. She looked at me, she went, thanks. And I said, well, we're missing 2 Sundays. I can't miss another one. We'll do stuff all weekend long for your birthday. So,
Oh, we'll have to do something that day.
I'm telling you. And hey, we need to celebrate because Tammy's turning 60 this week. It's
No,
going to be
I'm
amazing.
Where did that come from?
Oh, man.
No,
Sorry.
it's not that far away, but I do have
She's
birthday.
turning 58. I apologize. So,
Frank said if I could lie to him.
I had no idea. You did have your 40th class reunion though.
I did have my 40th last year.
you're getting up there. Anyway,
And Terry has
Okie dokie. Yay, there we go. All right. Now, last week we got through John chapter 9, and we got through the whole chapter, which was kind of awesome to get it all covered and cleared. And so tonight, throwing stuff, it's going to be great. We're going to be in John chapter 10, and we're going to be looking at 2 I am statements tonight. Now, what's the importance about the I am statements? We've talked about it, but what do y'all remember? What's so important about those statements? So, wow, y'all rely on the students to answer for y'all. This speaks volumes of our adults. Anyway, no, no. Why are the I am statements so important?
Shows the authority.
Yeah, shows the authority, shows the divinity, shows who Jesus really is. And these statements are emphatic, meaning they're defined. They're not wishy-washy. They're not simple. They're very much set in stone with this stuff. And so tonight we're again be a John. I cannot talk. John chapter 10. You know, I would love to see how the transcript on YouTube does that last part. Like it's just be like a bunch of random little letters put together. Anyway, not my fault. All right. So, do what? Question marks. ... Crazy person. Crazy noises. Hand motions. John chapter 10, starting in verse 1, says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters into the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers." This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. He who is a hired hand is not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock and one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life, that I might take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father." There was again a division among the Jews because of these words. Many of them said, "He has a demon and is insane. Why listen to him?" Others said, "These are not the words of one who is oppressed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?" So, this is taking place right after John chapter 9. Chapter 9, what did he do? What was the big thing that happened in chapter 9? Healed the blind man. He healed the blind man that had been born blind. So this happened, and no one has ever done that before. And so this is the continuation on of what's going on. And so Jesus, again, his discourse on himself as the good shepherd flowed directly from chapter 9 as Jesus continued to talk to the very same people. The problem of chapter 9 was that Israel was led by false shepherds who drew them astray from the true knowledge and the kingdom of the Messiah. And so those false shepherds are who? Oh, come on. Who are the two main groups that opposed Jesus? Pharisees and Sadducees. The religious leaders of the day were those false shepherds, and they were talking to them and trying to do stuff, but it was leading them away. And so verse 1, it says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, he does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in another way, is a robber." So again, he starts off, truly, truly, an emphatic statement, very blunt, Here we go. Jesus spoke in verses 1 through 30 using a sustained metaphor based on first century sheep ranching. The sheep were kept in a pen, which had a gate through which the sheep entered and left. The shepherd engaged a doorkeeper. We talk about that in verse 3 here in a moment, or a hired hand, as the under shepherd to guard the gate. The shepherd entered through the gate. He whose interest was stealing or wounding the sheep would choose another way and attempt to entrance. So in the words of Ezekiel 34, most likely form the background of what Jesus is teaching here, since God decried the false shepherds of Israel. So those are the spiritual leaders of the nation for not caring properly for the flock of Israel. So the sheepfold was a place of security, not a place for intruders. Such a sheepfold would likely have been either a circular or square enclosure, probably constructed like a high stone fence or wall, and perhaps topped with vines. The entrance would have been one break in the wall, and once the sheep were safely inside at night, the watchman or guard, either a servant or a shepherd, usually an assistant, would lie down across the opening and serve both as the protector of the sheep and as the gate to the sheepfold. So unless an intruder was willing to confront the watchman, the only way into the sheepfold was to climb the wall. And so that's what we're looking at here, and this is what Jesus is trying to use. He's using something these people would know very, very well. Israel today, you still have a few shepherds, and most of them are Bedouin, but the Bedouins have not been allowed to shepherd sheep in quite some time because they took all their rights away. There's villages like Lakia and a couple of other spots where they've shipped all the Bedouins to, and they're cities for them, but the government is cracking down. They only have one shepherd that's a Bedouin that's allowed to actually do his sheep the way they used to. And the reason is because during World War II, you had all this stuff attacked, and all these places in Israel were swamped by the enemy forces, and they put landmines all over the mountains to try to get the Israeli army. This one Bedouin sheep herder, that was his mountain that he shepherded his sheep on. He knew every blade of grass. He knew every blade of anything, and so he literally was able to walk with the army and go, that's a bomb, that's a bomb, that's a bomb, because he knew the land so incredibly well, and not one Israeli person died because this sheep herder knew that area so well. And so there's actually a kind of a monument, a statue made of him, and he's the one that's allowed to keep his sheep. All the other Bedouins had their sheep taken from him, but because of his service to Israel, they allowed him to keep them. So the Bedouins were treated a lot like Native Americans were treated here. And that's kind of the way it is, because they were nomadic. They didn't have specific spots. And so you take these people that move around as shepherds, and suddenly you slam them into these communities and you say, y'all live. And the way the rules are, and this was many, many years ago, last time we were there, the way the rules are is that they can only do repairs, they can't replace. And so if it gets to a certain level of destruction on their house, then the government gets to come in and tell them what they can do. And so it's a crazy setup, and so the Bedouins are very low on the totem pole. They're a lost people group. They're one of the groups that the IMB recognizes as a lost people group that needs to be reached for the gospel, because most of them are Muslim, not by belief, but by birth. So they will tell you, I'm Muslim, but they have no idea what that means. All they know is they're told they're Muslim. And so it's something that they were doing work there. There was a ministry here that was called the UK Ministries, and they went over there and they took care of them. But the IMB missionaries that worked with the Bedouins, he got cancer and ended up going to Tel Aviv, and these Bedouins were showing up. People were freaking out because these Bedouins were coming out of the village to come see him because they honored him, and they saw him because he'd been there for years. He lived there for like 20 years with them. And so when he had to be pulled from the field, it just kind of the door shut. And the Bedouins aren't very trusting people. And good food, though. They cook amazingly well. Of course, I would talk about food. I'm stuffed to here with the soup you brought, but I'm just, woof. Anyway, I felt like, this is totally random, nothing to do with Jesus, but the soup was so blazing hot, I was burning my mouth, but I felt like I was a dog growling at it, still trying to eat it at the same time, going, and I just kept going after it. It was so good. Anyway, so back to Jesus. Okay. So again, he who enters the door is the shepherd of the sheep. And so this whole representation, he's trying to get them to understand that sheep are only going to respond to those that they know. And so the fact is, when we get into verse 3, what does it say? The gatekeeper opens the sheep, hear his voice, and he calls his sheep out by name. So there's actually documented cases of this even today, where you have sheep herders in Israel and they lead their sheep. Unlike the Western culture where we drive our sheep with dogs and whips and whatever else, these people led their sheep. They actually would go in, and you would normally keep the village's sheep all together in one place, because it was safety in numbers and they protected them that way. And so imagine you have 4 different flocks in this one spot. And so these 4 different flocks are housed together at night, but then a particular shepherd would show up and he would walk into the gate. The sheep would see him. He would then step out and he would begin to call them with his call. And so the same thing would happen at watering holes. The same thing would happen at wells or whatever it was. So if Preston has his own flock, I have a flock, Ed's got a flock, and Frank's got a flock. And the 4 of us are bringing all of our sheep together. There's 200 sheep here. And you're sitting there going, how in the world can you make sure you get all your sheep? Well, if you know the sheep and the sheep know you, all you would have to do is whistle and say what you got to say, that your sheep will know, and your sheep will come to you, and they won't go to another shepherd. They've done experiments with this in the Bedouin villages where they have guys dress up just like the shepherd, look just like him, and they say the exact same words that the shepherd would say to call their sheep. And all that ends up happening is that what? They would run away in fear because they look the part, but they're not actually speaking the truth of the voice, right? And so it's an amazing thing that they're talking about here. He says, the sheep hear my voice. Near Eastern shepherds stand at different locations outside the sheep pen, sounding their own unique calls, which their sheep recognize. As a result, the sheep gather around the shepherd. And so there was a story in one of the commentaries I came across where he was talking about going through Israel, and there's a shepherd walking along a highway where there's cars and bustling. And he said as the shepherd walked by, he was humming a song and doing these light little whistles, and the sheep just fell right in line and followed him perfectly and didn't get out of. Why? They trust their shepherd. Their shepherd protects them. Their shepherd looks after them. The shepherd leads them to water, leads them to pasture, leads them everywhere that they need to go. So Jesus, when he starts talking about, man, these sheep, he's using something that these people would understand very, very well. He's using something that they're going to see and understand and know. And when he says he calls his own sheep by name, the shepherd goes even further by calling each sheep by its own special name. So Jesus here points, Jesus' point is that he comes to the fold of Israel and calls out his own sheep individually. And so again, there's a lot of guys in there that I read today that are like, oh no, they didn't really have names for. If you protect these sheep with your life because you're their shepherd and that's your livelihood, guess what? You're going to know each one intimately. You're going to know them. You're going to know the nuances. You're going to know their personalities. You're going to know all these different things. And most likely you're going to be naming these things as well because you protect them and you take care of them. And so you're going to call them their own name. And so, you know, what we get into see in verses 4 and 5 is this. It says, when he has brought out all of his own, he goes before them and the sheep follow, for they know his voice. And then again, a stranger they will not follow. They'll run from him in fear. So unlike, again, Western shepherds who drive their sheep, the Near Eastern shepherds led their flocks, their voice calling them to move on. This draws a remarkable picture of the master/disciple relationship that we have here. And so here's the crazy part. Sarah used to get on to me about whistling at the boys. You know, she would be like, don't whistle, they're not dogs. And I'm like, just trust me on this, trust me on this. And this was years of practice, not in learning how to whistle, but years of practice with working with students. I could be in a crowd of students, and I could be at like Universal Studios when we went this past time. I can whistle, and my students, the funny part is the Loris First Baptist crowd would freeze in their tracks and turn and look to me just by one whistle. And it was the oldest ones that responded the fastest. Why? Because I'd had them the longest. And so when I whistle, they turn. The boys, we can be anywhere, and I can whistle. They stop, and they turn. Why? They're trained to that whistle. My grandmother, this big, and when she whistled, it wasn't powerful. It wasn't strong. It was kind of airy. But when Grandma whistled or grandmother whistled, everything stopped. And of course, at that time, I, myself being me, I said, hey guys, the general wants to speak. And she would look at me and go, "Oh, Hunter, stop it." And then you'd see this grin because she liked being called the general because she ran everything. But everybody listened to that whistle, and we all knew that whistle because we heard that whistle since we were a little bitty. And so the sheep are going to respond to those who lead them. And this is the difference when you get into pastoring and this whole idea of leading, pastoring, shepherding. What most churches are looking for is they're looking for someone that can pastor them. And what does that actually look like? Well, that means someone that can lead and shepherd them. And unfortunately, you got a lot of preachers today. You don't have a lot of pastors. So a preacher can get up and talk. A preacher can get up and give you a message to be inspired. A shepherd is one that's going to be in the trenches, going to pull you out of the ditch, going to do those things for you. And so it's a totally different mindset here. And so we are called, right, to lead by example. And that's where spiritual leadership really comes in. 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 3 says, "So I exhort the elders among you, as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock." We're called to lead them, not beat them into submission. That's the difference. There's difference between, and when you get into the military, and I know you could probably speak to this, you have a difference between an officer that the men respect because of example, and you have an officer that's there by title. The ones that are there by title will throw that title at you left and right, and you don't respect those guys. You have to answer to them, but you don't respect them. The guys you respect, a lot of times, are the NCOs, the non-commissioned officers that earn that position because they led, and people will follow them. Heard a guy tell me one time, on a Navy ship, the master sergeant has more authority than the admiral, because the master sergeant is that enlisted man that worked all the way up. In the Marines, what is it, the gunnery sergeant? I know each branch has their own, but those are the guys you listen to. Why? Because those are the guys that have been through the trenches, and they've done it day in and day out, and they're there to protect the people. So the image of the shepherd here is an extremely important biblical picture of a leader, because it implies not only an intensely personal relationship between God's people and their leaders, but a style or model of leadership exemplified by Jesus. We see that in Mark 6:34. So the very word leadership is developed from the shepherd imagery, where the shepherd goes before the flock and encounters the problems of the flock first. The shepherd does not issue commands in a pyramid fashion down to subordinates who carry out his wishes like a general or admiral who stays back out of range of the conflict, nor is a shepherd a whip-carrying organizer who drives the sheep into the pen, or a particular pastor. But a shepherd knows the setting, leads the sheep, and they follow him. You see that here in this verse. That's what he's talking about. That's what Jesus does for us. That's what pastors are supposed to do for their flock, for their people. And so often today we miss that picture. And I say we in the sense of overgeneralize for pastors. Pastors, unfortunately, today, big time overgeneralization. This is not every one of them. This is just that kind of general statement. Pastors today don't lead by example. They lead by coercion or force. And if you don't agree with them, then they bounce and they go find a church that will. They want a church that's submissive and a church that's going to follow without question. Now, I'm not going to say what branch of denomination that sounds like, but unfortunately, there's a lot of Southern Baptist churches out there now that are that way. Well, you didn't listen to my leadership. Well, how are you leading? What does that actually look like? I don't know about y'all, but I like to be, when we're all together in a crowd, no one knows that I'm the pastor because I'm just cutting up and being like everybody else. But when do people find out when the pastor's there? A problem arises, I should be the first one up and moving, right? And that's something that I read this, I studied this, and going today, I'm like, man, this is what I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And that's what's really what we're all called to be if we are leaders within the church. Whether it be a Sunday school teacher, whether it be a leader because you're an older individual in the church and you've led by example for all these years, whatever it is, we are called to lead. We all have our own little flocks. Y'all may not realize this, but you have people that will follow your lead. It may not be your children. It may not be your grandchildren, it's other people that are watching going, man, I'm going to follow what they're doing. So where are we leading them? Are we leading them to good places, or are we leading them away from where they should be? You know, are we leading them into turmoil, or are we leading them into safer places? You know, and so Sarah and the boys, Sarah, when we first got married, she learned real quick, and I use this as part of our mentor stuff when I mentor men talking about their wives. I said, my wife learned very early on. I had a conversation that said, hey, listen, if we're in a parking lot and I say, get in the truck, I just need you to get in the truck. And the first time it ever happened, I hadn't had a chance to explain anything to Sarah yet, and we're walking through the parking lot down at the beach, and I said, I need you to get in the truck now. And she went, okay, like she didn't even question. And as soon as we got in the truck and I started it up and we went to drive away, she says, what's going on? I said, 2 aisles over, there was someone that, it was, I needed you in the truck. I was like, if you're safe inside the vehicle, I can take care of what needs to be taken care of. But as long as you're out here, I can't. And so I'm trying to teach the boys the same thing. Y'all get in the truck now. Like, they're learning that, because me being taller, I can see things coming. You know, not everyone's blessed with Preston's height, where he has to look through the windows to try to see things. I get to see over the cars. Don't pick on Preston for being little. Man, he's a full-grown man. He does not need a timeout. He might need a nap. But I got to pick. Anyway, all right, back to Jesus. Okay, verse 6. So this figure of speech Jesus used in verse 6 with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. And here's the thing, the phrase is conveying the idea that something cryptic or enigmatic is intended in it. It occurs again in chapter 16:25 and 16:29, but not in the synoptics. Having given the illustration, Jesus then began to draw on the spiritual truth of all of it. And so he's trying to get them to understand, and then he switches to this lovely statement, truly, truly, emphatic statement, I am the door of the sheep. So what does this really mean? So this is the third I am of the 7 I am statements of Jesus. Here, he changes the metaphor slightly. While in verses 1 through 5, he was the shepherd, here he is the gate. While in verses 1 through 5, the shepherd led the sheep out of the sheepfold, here he is the entrance to the sheepfold that leads to proper pasture. This section echoes Jesus' words in John 14:6, that he is the only way to the Father. His point in that he serves as the sole means to approach the Father and partake in God's promised salvation. As some Near Eastern shepherds slept in the gateway to guard the sheep, Jesus here pictures himself as the gate. So there is no, I can't talk. So there is but one door to the fold, and the sheep and the shepherds alike have to enter through that door. There's no other way. We've been looking at that. We've been talking about that. But all who seek to bring life to others, but who do not themselves enter throughout Christ, stand condemned. And so what this really boils down to, so many people want to show you the way, but they themselves don't follow Jesus. And so the best way that it was shown to me, and this is when we were over in Israel and we went to the Bethlehem fields, where they have the caves and everything, where a lot of the shepherds would house the sheep at night. One of the things they did, and they would make me stand in the back, because our tour guides were a set of twin brothers, great guys, and they're each about 6'3". And so they would be in the front, I would be in the back, and the whole rule was you stay between the two tall people. And so we made whole group stand between us, because no matter how crazy crowded it got, they could see him and they could see me. And so we got into the cave, and he said, hey, Hunter, I need you to do me the favor. I need you to sit down in that doorway. So if you imagine here for a moment that this doorway is literally leading into the sheepfold, or leading into the cave to protect the sheep, what Jesus is inferring here is that himself, he would actually sit down, and this is how shepherds would do. This is how they become the gate. They would literally sit just like this, and they would sleep here. The sheep that are here would not cross them, because they would have to go through the shepherd, and any thief, wolf, or any animal would have to come through the shepherd. So the shepherd himself is the actual gate. He protects all things. He watches all these things. and he keeps up with everything. And so this is what Jesus is saying. I am the door. In order to get to the sheep, you got to go through me. In order to have safety, you got to go through me. And what he's saying here, even more so, is what? In order to get to the Father, you got to go through me. And so we are called bigoted because, oh, you say that no other way is to heaven. No, Jesus said there's no other way to heaven. We're just following his words. But he goes on to say this in verse 8, all who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. He's talking about the religious leaders. He's talking about these people. Verse 9, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be, and there's that lovely word, saved. And he will go in and out and find pasture. And so he goes on to say in verse 10, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. I come to give life, and it's my habit abundantly. So these two verses are a proverbial way of insisting the belief in Jesus as the Messiah and the Son of God, and the only way of being saved from sin and hell and receiving eternal life. Only Jesus Christ is the one true source for the knowledge of God and the one basis for spiritual security. So the supposition is that sheep are stolen not in order to be added to someone else's flock, but to be slaughtered for food and thus destroyed. The accent is on destroy, for being destroyed or lost is in the gospel in the very opposite of gaining eternal life. So he's dealing with the fact that the only reason the thief shows up is to eat what he steals, to destroy what he takes. It's not one of those, hey, I have my flock here at Mount Olive, and there's a flock down the road, and I'm going to try to come steal some of your sheep away and bring them into my... No. What he's talking about is the enemy wants nothing more than to steal people that are supposed to follow the shepherd, pull them out, and destroy them, and keep them from finding salvation, keep them from finding eternal life. So to counteract this threat, Jesus assumes the role of protector, and he likens himself to the guardian or the gate that provides salvation or safe haven to sheep who pass through it. So if I'm laying there and sleeping there, I'm going to feel anything that comes up from my left. I'm going to feel anything that comes up from my right. It all enters and leaves based on what I say. So the way shepherds would watch the flocks back then is sometimes they would have a hired hand or an under shepherd that would be at the gate, and then the shepherds would actually strategically place themselves around the area. Again, you're watching, you're keeping watch, and they could make certain noises or calls and let people know, hey, there's something coming. And so he gets into this whole idea in verses 11 through 18. Jesus picked up another expression of what he looked at verses 1 through 5. He's the good shepherd, but in contrast to the present evil leadership of Israel. This is the fourth of I am statements, and the term good has the idea of noble and stands in contrast to the hired hand. And where does he say this? But in verse 11, I am the good shepherd. And so this whole idea that he lays down his life for his sheep, this is a reference to Jesus' substitutionary death for sinners on the cross. But here's the thing. Jesus then developed the sheep shepherd figure in a third way. When evening settled over the land of Palestine, danger lurked. In biblical times, lions, wolves, jackals, panthers, leopards, bears, and hyenas were common in the countryside. So the life of a shepherd could be dangerous, as illustrated in David's fights with at least one lion and one bear that we know of. Jacob also experienced the labor and toil of being a faithful shepherd. We see that in Genesis chapter 31, 38 through 40. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. And so in the Old Testament, God is called the shepherd of his people. We see that in Psalms and Ecclesiastes and Isaiah and Jeremiah. Jesus is this to his people, and he came to give his life for their benefit. And so we see that in John, we see that in Galatians, Ephesians, and Hebrews. And so what it goes on to say here is that when, I jumped way too far, I'm sorry. When the wolf comes, when the hired hand sees the wolf coming, the hired hand runs. Why? Because he cares nothing for the sheep. The hardest reality is that when you pay someone to take care of something, and the moment it gets tough and they bail, why do they bail? This is something that you find often when it comes to business owners, is they have a passion for what they do, and so they will work 18-hour days, and they will fight for it, and they will pour into it, and then they hire people to do this, and those people don't have their same passion, their same drive, their same desire, and so the moment things get hard, they're out. And it kills you. This happens in churches too, that you have a passion for this ministry, or you have a passion for this desire, or you have a passion for seeing these people come to know the Lord, and others are like, hey, I'll help you in that, and then the moment things get difficult, or the moment there's a threat, they're gone. And so this is what he's talking about. The hired hand likely represents religious leaders who perform their duty in good times, but will never display sacrificial care for the sheep in times of danger. They stand in contrast to Jesus, who laid down his life for his flock. So in this text, the meaning that is being emphasized is that Jesus represents authentic security for his people, whereas those who are not aligned with Jesus are ultimately destructive symbols set against the well-being of the sheep. So what does that really boil down to? Man, shepherds aren't willingly going to die. They're not. They're not going to walk out there to a bear and go, eat me. Run, sheep, run. Eat me. That's not how they're going to do things. They're going to try to fight and protect and do everything that they can to make sure that their sheep are taken care of, even if that means leading them away from the problem. But they're not normally going to die. They're not going to willingly lay down their life. That's the difference. That's why when Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd, what he's dealing with here is, I'm going to lay down my life because in laying down my life, I bring you victory. I bring you salvation. I bring you safety. So when he goes on to say in verse 16 that I have sheep that are not of my fold, not of this fold, who's he talking about? Gentiles, us. Right? So he's referring to Gentiles who respond to his voice and become a part of the church. We see that in Romans 1:16. So Jesus' death was not only for Jews, but also for non-Jews, whom he would make into one body, which is the church. Man, that's the coolest part, is that he did it for everybody. He did it for you, he did it for me, he did it for all of us. And that's why I think we forget that, is that he is that good shepherd that was willing to lay everything down, willing to hand it all over, and willing to do what he needed to do to protect us. Right? If he's the door and he's controlling who goes in and who goes out, you'll have some that say, well, that means he's not going to let certain ones in. Well, if he calls them by name, they're his, they're going to follow his voice. So here's the fun part. When the person on a Sunday morning or on a Sunday night or a Wednesday night or even at an event or a whatever steps out into the aisle and makes their way down forward, why do they do that? Well, you have this draw that you can't explain, right? I love what some people have said. I didn't even realize I was walking down I didn't even realize I was walking down there till I was halfway down, and I'm going, what am I doing? What's going on right now? I'm so confused, right? And so that's the thing, is there's this call. Why? Because we're sitting there so often, and we're white-knuckling that pew in front of us. And when that call happens, we have a choice, and that choice is we let go of the pew, and we step out, and we follow the call. And it's like being in the sheepfold, and the shepherd is calling us, and we're sitting there going, I'm not going. I'm staying right here. I'm not moving. And that's what so many of us do. But when we step out, and this is what I tell people, it's not the prayer that saves you. It's answering that call to step out and come down. In that moment, you've just given him everything. The prayer just solidifies it. The prayer just gets it to where we understand what we're doing, and we're able to say, Jesus, I trust you, and I believe in you, and please, help me, and thank you for paying for me. But all those things are coming into this, and so we struggle with the idea that things might get hard. We struggle with the idea that sometimes we have to follow a shepherd, and we don't know where we're going. But why does Jesus refer to us as sheep? We will go astray, absolutely. But why else? Go ahead, Mom. I know you want to say it. Oh, sheep are stupid. Straight up dumb creatures. And I love this movie quote. It's from Men in Black, and Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith are talking, Agent K and Agent J. And he's like, well, people are smart. He said the individual is smart, but people as a whole are stupid, finicky, fickle creatures. And that's the truth. I've taught that for years, and my students finally got the opportunity to see that at Scarowinds 2 years ago. I don't know if y'all remember all the papers, all the things that happened at Scarowinds one night, and there was riots, and we were there that night. And it was bad. And I'm sitting there with a group of 30 at Scarowinds. They know all my rules. They know what my expectations are. We're in line for the Intimidator. And all of a sudden I see people just running. And I'm like, and they're screaming, and I'm sitting there going, okay, something's not right. Something that you could feel it in the air. And so instantaneously, I pull out my phone. We have a huge group thread, and I text the entire thread. Everybody to me now. This is where I am. But the problem was, because of everything going on, everybody flipped their cell phones out, and so everything was jammed. If you were an AT&T customer, you could not get reception. Verizon customers could. It was crazy. But just because I guess there were so many AT&T customers in the area. But so anyway, so this is happening, and so we have a whole pocket. And so with me, I have who's now the chief of police down at North Myrtle Beach, Dana. She's with me, and I've got all these adults with me. And Dana and I both do the exact same thing in this moment. The kids are behind us, and we literally stagger. I look at my boys that are 6'3" and 200, and I'm like, y'all are in front, the little ones in back. Y'all stand there, do not move. And then myself and a couple of other adults are fanned out in front of them. It happens again in front of us, and so Dana and I both. Now Dana's here, and I'm here, but we both instantly look to the epicenter of where this is coming from, because I want to see where the issue is. Where's the problem? And so everyone scatters, and then the crowd quiets. And then it's almost like there's electricity in the air, the way that they're acting. And so I start moving towards where the epicenter of this is. I start walking that direction, and a dad is walking with me. And he's like, man, if they run, we got to get out of the way. And I said, no, we don't. I said, stand perfectly still. And he was like, no, you got it. And I said, stand still. Trust me in this. Stand still. And we walked about 30, 40 yards, and we're getting closer. There's this huge pack of people. And again, it's like electricity. And some of the kids thought this was hilarious. And so they would randomly scream, which would incite panic. And so that happens. I'm watching grandmas dragging their babies, and there's these little 3-year-olds that are being dragged, screaming, and people are getting trampled, and they're running at us. And this dad that was with me, he steps behind me, because I just stopped, and I just stood, and he was like, we got it. And I was like, stand still. And he gets behind me, and he's doing this, like he's trying to brace me from behind. And I said, buddy, they're not going to touch us. And he was like, what do you, I said, in a mode of panic, all they see is there's something there, so they break around it. And that's exactly what they did. This huge crowd of 100 people are running at us full speed, and they just break right over us. Why? Because they're flighty and they're stupid in those moments. What it boiled down to at the end of the night was some kids were stealing from Chick-fil-A right there at the front, got in a huge fight, and you had a couple of security guards and some police officers that arrested them. This was during the time of all the shootings that were happening. And someone in the crowd, when they started doing this, a group of kids that were really not smart surrounded the police officers and were like, you're going to let them go. And the cop said, y'all are going to back up. And at that time, someone screamed, oh my God, he has a gun. And it incited panic across the park. And so literally I have students texting me that are outside of the park because they got pushed out of the park with one of these random fear riots. And so when Jesus talks about us as sheep, one of my students that night looked at me, or he's a former student, and he said, you always talked about the crowd and how the crowd can just shift in a moment. He said, I never understood it until tonight, where I actually watched it happen. I said, exactly. That's why we have to be cognizant, we have to pay attention, we have to always be watching what's going on. And so a lot of things are happening in this moment. And so Jesus is like, listen, you got to follow me. I'm going to protect you, but you got to trust me in the process. There are storms sometimes that we walk through that terrify us. But Jesus is like, I got this. Trust me in this. And so it's a hard thing to do. It really is. So in verses 17 what we see here, let me jump there. For this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay my life down and I must take it up again. Verse 18, no one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have authority to lay it down. I have the authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. So again, this whole idea, Jesus repeated the phrase twice in these two verses, indicating his sacrificial death was not the end. His resurrection followed the demonstration of his messiahship and deity. And so his death and resurrection resulted in his ultimate glorification and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And so this had to happen. The Good Shepherd had to die so that we could then follow after him, which is just a mind-boggling thing in so many ways. And so it goes on in 19, it says, again, the Jews, you got a demon in you. There ain't no way you're normal. And they're divided. Why? Because mixed reactions. Charged of being demonically possessed. Others concluded his works and his words were a demonstration of God's sanction upon him. And so all of these things are going on. The rejection of the Jews. All of this is happening. And so the Jews are getting more and more fractured. Half love him, the other half don't know. And they can't stand him. And this is the volatileness that we're going to see. Because here in 2 chapters, you're going to see a shift in the rhetoric of the book of John. Because it's no longer about Jesus' ministry. It becomes about the last 24 hours of his life. And so we're getting to that point. This is kind of fast-tracking, if you will, all of the tension that's going on within Jerusalem at that time. And so it's this powder keg where you could feel electricity in the air, and all it takes is one little thing, and it sets it off. And so that's what's going on here. That's what we're prepping for. And so we're going to get into some of these other statements here shortly. And the whole death of Lazarus and Jesus bringing him back, we'll see this here in about 2 weeks. That was that final moment. Because all of a sudden, they sought not only to kill Jesus, but they also planned to kill Lazarus because it gave him authority over death that they did not like. So it's crazy. So anyway, that's where we're going to stop tonight. And we will pick up in verse 22 next week. But, any questions? We got about 7 minutes left, and I didn't know if y'all had any questions or anything about what we just talked about. Yeah.
Does that not destroy the whole Hebrew Israelite argument?
Which argument?
Their argument that Jesus was over for them.
Oh, yeah, that destroys it completely. Yeah, well, Atlanta has 122 different languages being spoken right now, representing 122 different countries. Oh, yeah, within the Beltway. Send Atlanta. Atlanta is a hub for the world. And so NAM, North American Mission Board, I went to Send Atlanta, and we went and visited different churches in Atlanta and looking at church plants. And the way Atlanta is set up is that, Frank and Tammy, y'all live on Bedford Road, correct? Huh? Yeah, y'all live farther down. But here's the crazy part. The way Atlanta works, there would be a church right here, but if you lived on that street, you wouldn't come to this church. So there would have to be a church planted on that little area, and then y'all would go to that church. It's so sectioned off. They literally fight to move 2 blocks over because then all of a sudden they're in a higher demographic and they're seen in a higher state of where they are. And so we went to church plants that were in brownstones, which are, those 4-story, really, really thin houses. And there was a church plant there. Elevation Church out of Charlotte does they do a phenomenal job in training and sending church planters. And they have them on it's like a 3-year program where they pay for their rent, they pay the salaries to get those church plants started. And so we went to a couple of those. We went to churches that were monstrous churches, and the church met on 1 floor of the church, and the other 3 floors were rented out to other things because the churches had died back in the 80s. And so all of these things we got to see, but we also got all the information about Atlanta, and it was crazy. Like, you would go to invite people, and they're like, hey, you got to stick to this neighborhood. They're like, because once you cross that street, we don't want them. You know, and it was nuts. And so we learned a lot. But yeah, Atlanta's an interesting hub. It really, really is. And so you have Messianic Jews that say he's only for us. Yeah. No, Jesus was for everybody.
That's on flyers and stuff about that.
Yeah.
There was like, the protests and stuff, like it really opened our eyes to it.
Yeah.
There's
It-
a war going on.
Yeah.
There is, you know, and that's why some of the churches that are there are, you know, monstrous on the outskirts. But that's why you don't have a bunch downtown.
Yeah,
You know.
those were all like on the outskirts and then every corner was a church. Like, there was so many.
Well, yeah, I mean, you had David Platt's church outside of Atlanta. You have, gosh, I can see his face. There's a lot of guys that are outside of Atlanta because there's money, there's power, there's wealth. And that's not why they're there. But their churches become very huge, you know. And then you have churches that are dying from starvation, and there's people all around. But you have different languages spoken, and you walk into different communities, and it's literally like walking into those places across the across the pond, as the Brits would say, you know. So I'm special. Y'all know this. Y'all I tell y'all voted on this. So that's gonna be my running joke as long as the Lord has me here. That's right. It's Tammy and Ms. Patty's fault. They were on the group that brought me here, and then y'all said, okay, let's do this. So, but no, it's interesting because, yeah, that destroys that whole argument that, man, he's only for us. No, there's others that are not part of this flock that are going to hear my voice. There's others that I'm going to go to, and you see that transition within the other Gospels is when Jesus transitions from trying to approach the Jews, and then he shifts and starts to work towards the Gentiles. That's the purpose of Paul as well, is to go to the Gentiles, and Peter sticks to the Jews. And that's why you see that transition in the book of Acts to all of a sudden it's about Paul. Why? Well, we're the ones that are sitting here. Paul's letters to the Gentiles, all of these things are moving forward. And so, people, unfortunately, are all about excluding others rather than saying, man, Jesus is for you. But there's stipulations to it. And the stipulation is you got to give him everything. You know, and so that's kind of the running joke I have is that if we were in a major city, I would have probably already been canceled because of the way I talk, the way I preach. Because this is what the Bible says. I don't care what you think, you know. So, no, it's interesting here because as we get a little bit deeper into his I am statements, we look at the last three. Powerful statements, truly powerful statements. And are we willing to follow that? You know, and what we don't realize, and this is kind of the crazy part too, Jesus says, I am the door. We're the door for people to let them in to see Jesus or not. Because our choices that we make show them Christ or show them us. And how are we pointing them? What's the example that we're setting as leaders? You know, are you the shepherd that's trying to push your flock up a hill, or are you walking up in front of them? And the thing is it's become so consumer driven that, it's about our numbers. It's not about the numbers. It's about that. No, it's about him. That's what it's got to be. And so, no, I'm looking forward to our conversation Sunday night. I'm looking forward to Sunday morning's message. I'm looking forward to all that stuff. Because the crazy part is, if we allow Jesus to do what he wants to do, we just follow. Because he's the shepherd. Our job is to answer the call. Our job is to respond when he says, I need you to come. Our job is to not question what he wants to do. And yet the world tells you question and fight and argue. And that's not what we're called to. And that's the problem, is those people do nothing but question and fight and argue, and they're not actually reading the words of Jesus. They're not actually believing in Jesus. Submission's hard. Especially for strong personalities. It's very hard to submit. Yeah, culture says, be you. You know, look at one of the big selling books there several years ago, Become the Best You, Be the Better You. It was all self-help. Sold millions of copies. Oh, I'm so much better because I read that book. I'm sorry. There's only one book that makes me better. I don't need you to tell me to feel better about myself, because I can do it. I can't do it. You know, so I think that's one of those things. Culture is fighting the truth. And the reason they're fighting the truth is because what culture follows is the king of the air, which is Satan, and it gets into a whole different realm of things, if you will. But
The sad thing is, just like you said, all those in the demographics of Atlanta, you're talking, there's mega places and all this other stuff, and, you know, a lot of situations in some of those churches and establishments, people are being laid off.
Yeah.
That's the sad truth.
those are the false shepherds that are up there saying, let me get you to the light. Let me get you there. You're not taking them to Jesus. I don't know where you're taking them. But what does the Bible say? They are condemned because of what they do. I mean, what does Scripture say? It's better to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the deepest part of the lake than to mislead a child. Not multiple children, but a child. And the millstone here, you're not talking about, oh, it's a millstone. No, you're talking about the one they use for grinding grain that is this tall, this wide, and you only move it with a donkey. It's better to have that tied around your neck and thrown into the deepest part of the sea when it comes to the Father than to mislead a child. And so that's that fear we talk about, or I talk about, in the sense of fearing what the Lord, when we start taking the credit, there's fear there. I mean, Moses, he took credit, and what happened? He disobeyed God, and there were consequences for that. He didn't get to see the promised land. But the funny part is, on the Mount of Transfiguration, who was there with Jesus? 1,500 years later, Moses shows up on the Mount of Transfiguration, and he gets to see things. Crazy. Just, that's a whole nother thing. But anyway, good? Cool. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much again for tonight. Thank you for this time. Jesus, just thank you for what you teach us and what you lead us in. So, Lord, continue to lead us and guide us. Give us strength. Allow us to follow after you. Lord, we love you and we trust you. Praise things in your name. Amen.